Airbnb is a really cool concept, but sometimes you end up in the strangest situations that you never thought were even possible. One of the 3 times that I used the Airbnb app, the one that actually ended up being the last time I used it, I decided to splurge a bit while I was on vacation with a group of friends. You see, we had been planning for years to go on an overseas trip to Scotland, and when we had all finally saved up enough money, we ended up finding this really cool castle to stay at on Airbnb. We were really surprised at the price of the castle, and the fact that we were able to book it less than a month before our vacation. But as soon as we saw that it was available, we made sure to book it for 3 out of the 8 days of our trip. When we arrived, we were all awestruck. By that point in our vacation, we had seen a bunch of really nice sights, but nothing compared to the view of the hills from that castle. I'm pretty sure that right away we all felt that it was worth every penny that we spent. Sadly, our mindset quickly changed as our first day in the old stone castle transitioned into the nighttime. We all stayed up in one of the larger common rooms, drinking and enjoying ourselves with one another, when out of nowhere, a strange chill seemed to set over the room. All of us noticed it, and it oddly seemed to put the entire group on edge. Almost immediately after that, the conversation slowly came to a lull and then was stopped entirely when the sound of a large clock chiming began to ring through the halls. The echoing of the ringing steel was hauntingly beautiful, and for some reason it was around that time that we all decided to head off to bed. Now, since it was a massive castle, we all managed to get a room to ourselves, but we made sure to keep them all next to each other in a single hallway in case anyone needed anything. I think every single one of us went into our rooms on edge that night, but I don't think any of us expected to experience the same strange happenings as each other. It all started around midnight. I was laying in my bed with my eyes closed, getting ready to drift off, when I heard the sound of scratching at the base of my bedroom door. My eyes shot open and I called out to see who was there, but I didn't get a response. As the scratching continued, I decided to check it out, but as soon as my feet touched the floor, the noise stopped. And when I went over to the door and opened it, no one was there. I was thoroughly confused, but just brushed it off and tried to get some sleep. But within a couple of minutes of laying down again, I heard a different sound. This time it was a clear tapping noise that seemed like it was coming from the other side of the wall that stood opposite the bedroom door. My eyes locked onto the section of the wall that the tapping was coming from, and before I could do anything about it, I heard the unmistakable sound of our friend Henry screaming from his room. I rushed out into the hall and saw the rest of our group heading towards his room to see what he needed, and when we got there, we were all surprised to hear that not only was Henry also hearing the tapping and the scratching, but all of us heard it. That night, we decided to stay in a single room together while we got used to the castle, and it ended up helping a lot because we all just talked about how it was probably nothing. And by the next night, we were all ready to sleep in our individual rooms again. Big mistake. As I got settled into my room, I walked around and took a good look at all of the walls and the decorations that the owner had set up. And as I made my way over to the section of the wall that I undoubtedly heard the tapping noise coming from, my eyes widened as I noticed a small hole going right through the stone. I squinted my eyes as I looked at it, and my vision slowly focused on the dark circle of empty space in the stone wall. And what I noticed sent me screaming and running out into the hallway. Through the hole, as my eyes focused, I noticed a small shimmer as if there was light reflecting off of something, and as I looked closer, I could clearly see someone's eyes staring back at me. I let out a loud scream and ran out into the hallway to let everyone know that we were being watched. I showed them all the holes in the wall, but when we shined a light through, we couldn't see anything other than what looked like an empty space between the walls. We all decided that even though we spent money on it, we didn't want to risk spending a third night in that castle, and ended up leaving that night and sleeping at a nearby motel for the next 2 days. Interestingly enough, as we all talked about the castle, I'm pretty sure that every one of us mentioned feeling like we were being watched at some point. It's unclear how long or how often whoever it was in that castle was watching us through those walls, but I'll never trust an Airbnb again. One of the strangest Airbnbs that I ever experienced wasn't actually a standalone house, but instead it was a room in this large house. The host had listed 4 different rooms on Airbnb, and then all of the guests just shared the large common area. It wasn't too bad to get used to on my first day there. I mean, sure, it was weird to share a house with strangers, but because I was on a road trip by myself and only needed a single room for a few days, It seemed like a sweet deal. Now, the one thing that stood out to me when I met the host and the person who lived in the master bedroom was that they claimed no place in the house was off limits except for the basement. He seemed very adamant that none of us go near the basement. That didn't seem like it would be a problem for me, and honestly, I wasn't even remotely interested in what was down there because I was so focused on the woods that surround the large house that the host owned. It seemed like the perfect place to go for a hike or ride quads. I was really jealous that they got to live there full time. At least, that was the case at first. I started feeling a lot less comfortable once I noticed that the host seemed to follow me around everywhere I went. It was something I could let slide at first though, considering I was a guest in his house. That changed when he approached me in the kitchen on my second night there though. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking a glass of water and scrolling through my phone when I noticed the host walk over to me and stare down as if he wanted to talk. So I put my phone down and asked him how his night was going. And without a moment's notice, he began to raise his voice at me. He claimed that he saw me looking at the door to the basement and very loudly told me that it was his private space and to leave it alone. I tried to explain to him that I didn't even know which door was in the basement, but he didn't want to hear it and just continued yelling at me. I ended up apologizing to the host just to get him to calm down, and then I ended up going into my room for the night. As time passed, I had a hard time falling asleep in my room after that altercation, and just as I was about to pass out, I heard the sound of someone knocking on the door of the room next to mine. I listened closely as one of the other guests answered. I could hear the host ask them to follow him, and I just decided to ignore it and continue to go to sleep. However, before I could manage to do that, I heard another noise. Only this time it was one that I'm pretty sure the entire house could hear. Someone was clearly screaming at the top of their lungs on the first floor. At first, I was frozen with fear from the bone-chilling scream, but as the shrieking continued, I knew that I had to check it out. I wasn't alone in my curiosity though. As I entered the hall, I saw another guest that was staying at the house peeking out of her room as well. The screaming continued as I walked through the hall and made my way down the stairs, and as I reached the first floor, I realized something that truly haunts me still. The screaming was coming from the basement. I decided that I needed to get help for whoever was down there and ended up running back upstairs and grabbed my phone. I called the police as fast as I could and then quickly got the other guest out of the house. As we sat in the driveway waiting for the police to come, the screaming ended up stopping. I locked my eyes on the house to make sure that the owner wasn't coming out, and I practically jumped out of my skin when I noticed the silhouette of a man standing at the window staring out at us. They slowly backed away from the window and disappeared into the darkness of the house. I watched the door as I fully expected the owner to come out and attack us or something, but thankfully the police showed up before anything like that happened. I explained to the officers what had happened and they quickly rushed into the house and made their way to the basement. However, what was really shocking was the fact that the house was supposedly empty. When they checked the entire place out, they couldn't find anyone. All they saw was that the back door to the home was left wide open as if the owner had run out the back and into the woods. After giving our statements to the police, we were all escorted inside to get our belongings, and then we all went our separate ways. To this day, I don't know who was screaming in that basement or where they went, but I can't help but shake the feeling that something horrible happened in that house that night. I opened up my home as an Airbnb, and within the first month I ended up unlisting it from the website and scrapping the entire idea. You see, my wife and I have been trying to sell our old home for over a year before we decided to turn it into an Airbnb, so we didn't really have strict rules about the place. As long as it was kept nice and the guests cleaned up after themselves, our plan was to let anyone stay there for as long as they needed to. The only thing that we did when we listed the house was get a single security camera that we placed in plain view at the entrance of the house facing the front door. That way we could see anyone who entered the home. Now, the first 2 guests that we hosted were so friendly and kept the house very clean, so my wife and I were actually very excited that we decided to take a chance on renting out our old home. That quickly changed though when one day I checked the camera after our 3rd set of guests had supposedly left. They finished up their booking, and when it was done, we got the text that they had left the key on the counter and we thanked them for their business. When I checked the camera, however, I noticed that was facing the opposite direction and all I could see was the wall behind it. I called my wife, who was still at work, and let her know that I was going to be running over to the old home to check on it and fix the camera. And then I got into my truck and made my way down the road. The house that we listed for Airbnb was only about 25 minutes from the house that we currently lived in, so I got there in no time. However, It was around 7:30 at night, so the driveway was pretty dark when I pulled into it. I figured that they must have just turned the porch light off and forgot to turn it back on before leaving. Again, it was no big deal, but I definitely noticed how dark it was. I carefully made my way up the gravel path into the front door of the house, and this is where things took a serious turn. As I reached out for the handle, the door ended up swinging open on its own without me even touching it. I was really confused by that, so I took a second before walking inside, but as I looked into the house, I couldn't see anything unusual. Eventually, I mustered up the courage and made my way through the threshold and into the home. That was when I felt something hard hit me from behind. I dropped to my knees and then turned around as fast as I could to see what had hit me. And that was when I saw someone standing in my house holding something in their hand that looked like a bat or pole of some sort. I put my hands up in front of my face to protect myself from any incoming attack, but that was when I was grabbed from behind by another assailant. They pulled me to the ground and held me there as the man who struck me in the back began digging through my pockets. They pulled my phone, my keys, and my wallet out of my pocket before letting me go. But I didn't even get to pick myself off the ground before I was struck over the head with a bat again. Everything around me went black as I fell back to the ground. I woke up a couple of hours later to my wife, who was shaking me awake. She said that an ambulance was on the way and that she had come to check on me after she got home from work and noticed that I still wasn't back. My wife also told me that my car wasn't in the driveway, and I knew right away that they had stolen it. After the ambulance came, I told my wife to call the police and to cancel the cards that we had in my wallet. I ended up needing 3 stitches on my forehead where I had been hit by the one assailant, and according to the police, there was no evidence that would help us find them. They never even found my car. We immediately chose to unlist the house from Airbnb and just tried to continue to sell it.